Charlie.
Good. Hi. How have you been?
Okay, doing okay.
Yeah. Terry, you're past commander of the Legion, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad you done a good job there. Vince Murphy.
All right, so
Murphy, your big day Monday.
What is Manchester United playing?
St. Patrick's Day.
That's Wednesday. Yeah, looking forward to it.
There you go.
yeah, but Johnny's Irish. He's in a hurry for it to get here.
Oh, Patrick's Day starts a few days early when you start the beer.
Yeah.
That won't be sober. Gotcha.
So I just want to let everybody know we are live with YouTube, with NCTV. It doesn't seem we have a quorum. Both the HDC and the Historical Commission were invited. Looks like we have one member, John, from the HDC, and one member, David, from the NHC. So what I would recommend, we do have posted meetings. We're not going to be opening a meeting if we don't have a quorum for either. So Terry, if you see any issues with that, if we're just going to be providing additional comments or hearing back from Phil, I think that would be the best bet. Just let me know if you see any open meeting law issues.
The usual sort of way to handle it is give it 15 minutes, 5 minutes.
Okay.
And if you don't have a quorum by then you're just having an informal discussion and I don't take notes. Well, I might take notes just so you have a informal record of an informal discussion. Definitely no votes.
Perfect. Absolutely. Thank you, Terry. Appreciate to have you here for all of this, and any comments actually from you have been very helpful for our MVP action grant. I just want to remind everybody that this is due to an MVP action grant that we received from Massachusetts Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Community Resilience Building Workshop that we had in spring of 2019. Obviously, historic preservation is a key component. And that was something that came out of both the HMP and the MVP. So we are pleased to continue this. Phil Thompson has been hired to be our consultant to create these design guidelines, and this is our third meeting to go over these as a public forum, if you will. So with that, I will turn this over to Phil. And in the meantime, I guess Terry will just wait to see for a few more minutes if we have more commissioners coming in.
Okay, well, good afternoon. And again, I appreciate your participation here today and look forward to receiving comments and moving forward on the design guidelines and hopefully getting them more into a final form as we go through the next couple of months here. The guidelines have been developed over, again, the last year. Some of the guideline information is taken from the meetings and workshops that we had back in November when I was in Nantucket, and was there for about a week getting a lot of photographs. But overall, the guidelines are based on the 2019 National Park Service guidelines that came out about rehabilitation of historic buildings when threatened with flood issues. So yeah, there we go, guidelines on flood adaptation for rehabilitating historic buildings. So we've been following those guidelines, and we set up the guidelines that we prepared for you with information on each section that are in the NPS guidelines, and doing our best to tailor that to the designs, the construction materials, and the overall character of Nantucket's historic districts. So the ultimate goal here is to have a very focused set of design guidelines that will serve as an addendum to building with Nantucket in mind. So we've received a number of comments to this point and have made some changes and revisions. And what I'm hoping for after today and receiving information and comments from you is to give you maybe another week to turn in any additional comments to Holly, let her send those to me, and then let me go ahead and compile all those comments and make the revisions for one more round of the draft, and then I can send that as a PDF out to you by the end of this month. And so that would give you all time on into April to review that revised draft and make any further comments back to me as we move forward. So today, as we go through, please, because we've done a couple of different revisions already, or additions of some drawings and that sort of thing. Please refer to like the section and particular language that would be easier for me to follow rather than page numbers, because I think my page numbers have probably changed a little bit since the original draft was sent to you. So with that, I'm happy to, again, move forward with any comments you've got. And please understand, I've already received a number of comments from Chuck and Vince and Val, and we've been making changes and revisions and yeah, just continuing to move on with the revised draft.
I'm sorry, my what?
Yeah, as we move on with the revised draft, yes. Mhm.
You want some comments on this?
Yes, please.
Okay. First of all, it's a well-written study. I got to say that I read almost 80% of it. It's nice to have the photos. That makes a lot of difference when you're trying to explain something about somebody. They got to see the picture. They see what the bricks are and whatever's there. That's just a beautiful commitment to this. And Mr. Welch, who made his comments in another meeting, and I go along with 100% with him about page 89 to 96, I think, with the photos and other comments. That's very important to the completion of this study, that it would be helpful to anywhere in the United States or any other country along the water of their countries. It needs something like this to help them as well as it helps the United States. So I think that should be there. And Mr. Thomason, it's a fine job by you and your company. And that's, I can't say much more. It's beautiful, it's well written. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your comments. Anyone else at the moment? I know we're still waiting until about quarter after to see if anyone else comes along.
Is Mr.
Hi,
Welch?
Abby. No, John, Mr. Welch is not here. From the
Oh.
HDC, we have yourself and Abby. If you have comments, Abby, Phil is all ears.
Oh, so I'm mostly a listener. I appreciate your thorough work. I don't have anything to add at this point. But we could talk about, Stephen's or Val's points if they're not,
Yeah, if you we have a couple of sections here that Val had some questions about in terms of the lifts, the chair lifts that we have. This would be under Nantucket Resilient Guidelines for Elevation Accessibility. That section, we show on the first page of that section, we show an ADA ramp and the chairlift that's at Four Whalers Lane. And then the next page has a couple of other illustrations for chairlifts, which Val did not feel would ever be particularly appropriate for Nantucket. And I'm not illustrating those to be literal, but just as different approaches that have been approved by preservation commissions in other communities, and just something to think about. I'm certainly not, the illustrations that I'm presenting, I'm just trying to show kind of a range of options, really. And the design review that you would be doing would be looking at maybe similar kind of projects, but certainly making your decision based on the character. Yeah, these are the illustrations that Val thought maybe should come out. I mean, I'm happy to take them out if that's the what the HDC feels is appropriate. But again, this is just showing how these chairlifts have been added to high elevation kind of projects in the past. And these are on side elevations, they're tucked back a ways, and were approved by the preservation commissions in these communities. So that was one point, and that's just something to think about. And other illustrations that she questioned were the at-grade dwellings, and those would be on the next couple of pages. And I expect that somewhere in your historic district, or at least maybe right outside the historic district, north of Brant's Point, you do have dwellings that are closer to being at grade in those areas. And so, these are just some illustrations again of how elevation has been handled for, the ranch style houses, the mid-century modern houses. Again, if you all want to look at having these taken out, we can do that. But again, this is just to show what other communities have done as a way of giving you information of how these would fit in with the National Park Service guidelines. But of course, we just don't have any similar illustrations or photographs of similar dwellings from Nantucket. Now, if there are some that have been elevated like this, I'd be happy to insert them. But my sense is that there's not anything quite like this, so we have to use illustrations from other communities. So that would be helpful to me as an HDC for you to reach concurrence on what illustrations you think are appropriate and which ones perhaps are not the best to have in the guidelines. And we can see about other kind of illustrations or just putting in text instead. So those are the main things that Ms. Oliver had to say. She had a number of other points and comments, but most of those are things that we can pretty much handle and, you know, are easy fixes. I'll put it that way.
Bill, for those particular ones, I make a good point about Brant Point. Brant Point, I believe, has structures that have been elevated in that regard. So I'm wondering if that might be something beneficial that we can get to you for that area and be
Yeah,
more
we
relevant
looked
to
out-
Nantucket.
Yeah, we looked out in that area, and, you know, certain number of them are sort of the lower kind of elevation. And I think what I was trying to show is what happens when you've got something at grade and it really has to go up real high. So that's what, you know, we're trying to show there. But again, if you just don't think they would be relevant to Nantucket in the future, we're happy to take those out.
I also want to open this up to any of we've got a couple of historical commission members here, David and Angus. If you had any comments and suggestions, please feel free to let us know.
Hi, you guys. This is quite a body of work. Nice job. The thing that caught my eye more than the guidelines was the spelling of Sconset throughout the draft.
Guilty, and we changed it. Yeah, we've already made those. Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah, so without having read the whole thing, where do we end up with guidelines for areas like Lower Main Street and Old North Wharf and areas as far as protection for the dwellings, and is that or other buildings, is that going to be is there a recommendation to go all or nothing, or one at a time as owners want to do their own thing? What was the consensus on that?
Well, what I've tried to present in the guidelines are just, you know, what the options are. I think, you know, there really needs to be, you know, community-wide dialogue about what you really want those areas to evolve into in the future. And, you know, that certainly is going to mean looking at ways of hardening those buildings or elevating those buildings as the sea level rise gets worse. So I see this as, you know, our guidelines is providing assistance on looking at what options you have in the future as you really debate the appearance and, you know, what you want your waterfront and those wharfs to be. And, you know, because you have just a real mixture of historic buildings and then buildings from the mid to late 20th century. And, you know, there is a lot of consistency that you have with, of course, the frame construction and the wood shingles and that sort of thing. But, you know, the reality is that, you know, wood shingles are not a particularly waterproof material. And, you know, what do you want to, you know, if I'm a property owner, I'm needing to see what my return on investment might be for any new construction, or if I elevate my property, is that going to be enough, or should I look at, you know, doing some retrofitting of materials to make my building more water resistant? So again, these are some tools in the guidelines for property owners to use. But yeah, I mean, the whole future of the waterfront and what you want that to look like is really an important community discussion, I think.
It sure is. Thank you, Phil. I guess the follow-up question to that is, you guys were so good to go to all the different groups around the island and get feedback from people. Was there any consensus from the community that you were able to gather for treatment in the areas that I was talking about?
I think you're talking about the other kind of discussions. Holly, you might want to address that.
Yeah, so you may be referring to the other resilient projects that are going on. You've got Envision Nantucket, you've got our coastal resiliency plan. There's a few different resiliency projects and surveys and whatnot that are going on at the moment. And Vince, myself, and even Kim have tried to make it so it's clear on what these particular projects are. I will say that this project to create these design guidelines and provide a toolkit, which came again right out of the HMP and the MVP planning processes, will tie in nicely with the coastal resiliency efforts that we are doing with the coastal resiliency plan with Arcadis. Phil's fellow consultant, Lisa Craig, and with the Craig Group is actually the consultant that's working with the coastal resiliency consultant Arcadis to make sure we have that continuity between preservation on our National Historic Landmark and making sure resiliency and preservation go hand in hand. And I think that's very, very important to realize that as much as our design guidelines are a very important and integral part of our resiliency efforts, it's a piece of the puzzle of the overall planning scheme. But I also think that Nantucket is very, very fortunate to be able to have these design guidelines at a time where it's really become a national discussion. The fact that the National Park Service created these design guidelines that I brought up November of 2019 is incredible. If you look through this document, which we have on our website, it's really, really clear on what they recommend and what they don't recommend. And I will say that there have been folks, architects that have actually utilized this in lieu of our own design guidelines. But what essentially our design guidelines are going to help our HDC and obviously agents and architects out there to make sure that we are in resiliency. We're creating this, our historic character is staying put, if you will, and doing it where we're not going to hinder our historic relevance under the National Park Service's eyes. So this is something that I think a lot of communities and a lot of preservation folks have been looking for a long time. I think Phil can definitely agree with that, with the work that he's done in other communities. It's nice to have the federal government being able to give that guidance. So I think we're at a really good crossroads, if you will.
Thanks for that clarification, Ali.
Yeah, and the 2019 guidelines are really coming from looking at what has worked or not worked particularly well since the early 2000s, especially after the impact of Katrina and Sandy, the two major hurricanes that did so much damage to historic buildings, on the Gulf Coast and on the Atlantic coast. So, we're still sort of in the process of fine tuning, I think, the best practices for resilience. And so I've certainly learned a lot in the last 10 to 15 years working with communities on the coast in South Carolina, North Carolina, Louisiana, about how their historic preservation commissions, historic district commissions have reacted, and we do have to make some changes, and we do have to allow our residents to do at least a certain level of elevation within some guidelines. I mean, Newport has gone through that. Charleston has gone through that. Charleston, South Carolina, and so it's the reality of how you deal with the integrity of these buildings versus your ability to pay for them with the increased flood insurance premiums that are facing a lot of people today. So that's what these guidelines are intended to do, to provide property owners with options for making their properties more resilient, and at the same time meeting the flood zone standards for getting these out of the water, so they can have a reasonable flood insurance premium in the years to come. So what Holly's showing now, of course, of the illustrations that we did showing at grade, or, the present condition of these properties. And then, just recommendations, suggestions for, how these could be elevated in a way that still keeps, the integrity of the building or structure as much as possible.
So,
Holly? I don't know that we might have to call an end to this because there's still no quorum of either commission. And you are kind of straying into a somewhat substantive discussion that probably shouldn't be taking place without a quorum. Because I
Okay.
cannot make these notes public.
Okay.
Just a suggestion. If anybody out there has a better thought on than I, or better experience, I welcome the advice.
Well, if there are no more comments from me today, please understand that it would be helpful to get anything else that comes up over the next week or so, get those comments to Holly, because I've got just a kind of a pile here of things to address, and I can do so, in the next couple of weeks. If you get any additional comments to me, say by next weekend, then I'll be able to do a revision of the draft by the end of this month and send that back out for review again. But I would appreciate if HDC members could communicate among themselves about any illustrations that you really do not feel are appropriate for your guidelines, and which you rather I remove, and that's fine.
Could I make a really quick suggestion, Holly? Could Phil come on for public comment on Tuesday and basically say what you just said about wanting any further discussions by the end of next week so you can make those revisions? What I have here can be internally circulated, but it cannot be discussed
Holly,
since it's not a meeting.
Holly, I have a comment.
Okay.
Okay. Also, to everybody, years ago on the HTC, 1955, they put out a small section of the old area town to write rules and regulations. And it turned out that the next book was the guidelines, HTC guidelines, it was called. They canceled the rules and regulations. And they only had 2 pages of architectural features in the old historic district areas. You probably all read it in the book. And the town council at the time was Mr. Durensis, very smart man. And he told us, he says, remember, that is only a guideline. It's a guide, but it doesn't say hard and fast. The ones that say hard and fast in description, as there is in this one today, for the water, that was for the housing in those days. And he said, so we wrote up 2 pages. They're usually in the back of the guidebook now. And everybody should get a look at it. And I believe you all got a copy of what I wrote on how it should be come out in the long run as rules and regulations. If you make something hard and fast, he said, you don't change it. You stick to it all the way through. Now, I don't know if you read what I sent. I hope you have, but that's up to you. But right now, we have a guideline sitting here in front of us. It hasn't been approved by any board or commission yet, but it's available. And this way, I think it's well written in description of how to take care of different things that are in it, such as the bricks to hold the house up, a solid foundation, window protections and stuff, doorways, all that. It's all has to be in it, but it should be, make it a rule and regulation, because right now the Historic Commission has gone to a situation of personal opinion more so than any sticking by the guidelines.
John
It's
is
not happening.
checking.
Only personal opinions are going on this. And that's what bothers me more than anything. 10 years from now, you could be in the same situation the HTC is now. There is no, other than 2 last pages in the guidebook describing stuff. And it's just senseless to do this. But I think it's needed for the whole country on the waterways around wherever, even wherever a river goes. It should be a very concise yes committee that this is what you can do. And then there's a no part of the committee that says, no, that is not appropriate. We have not approved to accept any of this yet. So as I say, if it goes on further, it should be a lot of thought gone into it before they say, well, let's vote and make something official. That, you have to back it up with something, not just ideas. You got to back it up with black and white on paper. So I'm just saying, I hate to see it get us in another mess with another commission. So I'm just saying, I think we have to sit down and go with making rules and regulations. So I'm just saying, it shouldn't be slap happy like some of the HTC is. So I'm not being critical. I'm trying to be objective. So that's my opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I will note that the guidelines that the HDC have adopted for what you use on a week-to-week basis are based on the Secretary of the Interior standards. That's a common practice, since the National Federal Preservation Act in 1966 was enacted. Again, that document that I just showed everybody, that is the guidance, if you will, from the federal government, from the National Park Service for historic districts for flood adaptation and elevation strategies. So you all are in the right track, and obviously Phil is guiding you all in the right direction. The biggest thing is wanting to make sure that design guidelines are created that you all can utilize on your week-to-week basis. With that, I don't want to hinder any more, any kind of stretching it here, but please, anybody out there in YouTube land as well that's watching, if you have comments on the design guidelines, which are available right on the Resilient Act website, as well as on the HDC's page, please email me. My email address is on the website. Any comments you have, commissioners, if you have any comments as well, I'd like to get those over to Phil. Phil, we appreciate your time as always. I apologize we couldn't have an actual full meeting, but I guess it is what it is, and we'll move forward with this. We want to make sure that these are utilized in this time of trying to prepare to be resilient for our National Historic Landmark. I guess
Yes,
with that.
well, you have
Good.
you have a regular meeting next week. Is that correct with the HDC?
Yes, sir. We do have a next meeting with the HDC. What is that?
The 16th at
Tuesday?
4:30.
Yes.
Tuesday, the
Tuesday
16th,
the 16th.
4:30. So if you sign on, right up at the head is public comment. You can come on and make that request for, like I said, it's just sort of what you said at the beginning about you want these comments. You've incorporated and reviewed some comments. Maybe just sort of a quick summarization of what you said today, but made in an actual proper public meeting.
Right.
And
Okay.
also to remind the commissioners who aren't here today. That's what I
All right.
was thinking.
And I will send you that information, Phil, and I will also confirm with the chair so he is aware of that.
Very good. Thank you. Mhm.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. Enjoy.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Holly.
Thanks for your
Uh-oh.
participation. We appreciate it. Thank you.
You, Phil.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you.
Anybody there? Boy. 25-minute meeting. I'm gonna save Nantucket with 25 minutes.